It feels like in Israeli politics, it ain't over even when it's over. Benjamin Netanyahu congratulating on Sunday his one-time chief of staff after Naftali Bennett ended Bibi's record-breaking 12-year stint as the country's longest-serving prime minister. If you listen, though, to Netanyahu's speech just before, it wasn't quite as sporting. We'll hear how the Likud leader does not sound like a man preparing for a career change. And then there's that one-vote margin by which Bennett becomes prime minister of an unlikely 8-party coalition that spans from his nationalist far right all the way to the pacifist left. How long can this government last? What do they agree upon besides being anti-Bibi, of course? Palestinians say it'll be the same policies either way, or will it? Among the first in this government, the active backing of an Arab-Israeli party, a pragmatic approach that will reap tangible benefits beyond Israel's border, or the recognition, just plain and simply, that the two-state solution is long dead. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what next for Israel after Netanyahu. Joining us from Jerusalem, correspondent Iris Mockler. No rest for the weary, Iris.
Certainly not, no. It's been a very big month if you go back to Ramadan and all the clashes inside Jerusalem, then the war with Gaza, and now we're looking at that flag-waving ceremony tomorrow, which might fire things up again. And in the middle of it all, a new government.
That's right. Let's see if the rest of our panel can concoct for you another snap election. From Jerusalem, Daniel Sturman, Israeli politics blogger for the Times of Israel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. From Beit Shemesh, media consultant Akiva Spiegelman. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And with us here in the studio, John Linden, Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. How are you?
I'm good.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, it was all smiles at that family photo earlier with the new cabinet, an upbeat Naftali Bennett promising a government of change.
We are at the beginning of new days. The hardships, not an exaggerated word in this case, of forming a unity government are behind us. And now, the citizens of Israel, all of them are looking up at us, and we must deliver. We will act together in partnership and responsibility to heal the rift amid the people and immediately bring the country back to functionality, regular functioning, after a long period of paralysis and strife. We are looking ahead.
Daniel Sturman, we hear him there talking about healing the rift. Can you tell our viewers what that means?
There is a rift, I guess you could say, in Israeli politics. Half of Israel seems to very much like Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister, and half of Israel seems to very much dislike Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister. This is the reason we went to 4 elections in 2 years. Every election ended in a deadlock. No side was able to form a government. No side was able to defeat the other. We had a brief, very brief unity government between Netanyahu and his then largest rival, Benny Gantz. And that fell apart, and we held a 4th election, and this new coalition was just barely able to put itself together and cross the finish line by, as you said at the very beginning, 1 vote.
So how did you feel this morning when you woke up? Did you think it's a new Israel?
It's the same Israel. The jokes have been going around that Naftali Bennett said, even if I become prime minister, the sun will still rise tomorrow. And the sun did, in fact, rise this morning. I checked. The new government hasn't been in power for even a day yet. And it isn't going to accomplish very much. There are so many rifts within the government itself, from far right to far left, including a semi-religious Zionist party, an Islamist party, several very strongly secular parties. They are going to have to come to some very, very careful agreements about any step they take in any direction on any policy.
And we can add to that list a very strong opposition, after all. Benjamin Netanyahu He was ousted for one vote. It was 60 to 59 in the end, the vote in the Knesset on Sunday. He's on trial for corruption, unable to win a majority after 4 consecutive snap elections. Still, the 71-year-old Netanyahu is not riding off into the sunset.
This fraudulent government will fall quickly. And I will tell you why. 3 things unite it: hatred, exclusion, and domination. Those are the 3 things. The desire for domination, which knows no limits, which has swept away any principles and is crystal clear. A government with so many contradictions can never stay together. With such hatred, one can't keep a government over time.
Akiva Spiegelman, is this, rhetoric, or is the vitriol still here?
So we're still trying to see, just like Daniel said, we don't know what this government is going to be capable of. They will be tested in the next few days with the flag march coming up. There's already threats about another escalation. With that, which is a big challenge for them, especially with the Arab Party being one of the coalition members. It's unclear. People were celebrating a whole new Israel today and a big change, a new dawn, as they said back in '99. But they haven't been tested yet. The glue that brought them together is not what's going to help them govern at this point. So we're going to have to follow very closely to see what they could actually get done.
Were you surprised at the fact that Netanyahu came out swinging?
I was not. He's not, like he said, he's not planning to go anywhere. This is part of his routine, this is part of his agenda. And he's been experienced. He's been around for a very long time. His party members have also been around. They've been to the opposition. They've been back. And they know what it takes to fight from that position. And so that's just classic Netanyahu rhetoric. That's what he does. And
what does he have that other Israeli leaders don't? Because in other countries, if you hold 4 snap elections and you still can't get a decisive majority, you're ushered to the exit. So what does he have that others don't that makes him still this mainstay?
Well, we've seen him in the primaries when there was Gideon Sa'ar ran against him. People thought maybe there's a chance there. There wasn't. He has a very strong base, very strong followers. He has a lot of, over the years, he's done a lot for Israel. That can't be unsaid. People have been somewhat ignoring that. Some people have been saying thank you. But we have to take the positive with the negative. He's led to a strong number of successes, including getting Israel past COVID-19. If it was back with the economy back in the day, he has a lot to say for himself. And so he's done things that nobody has come close to. Of course, he has his failures like everybody else. But he has this aura around him. And I'm not sure...
Like being on trial for corruption, isn't that normally a reason for, taking a step back from politics?
You would think so, but still, his base is strong. And people still believe that these cases, some people believe that these cases were brought upon in order to move him from office. And time will tell to see where these cases actually go. Every day there's new reports about misleading over here, a mistake made in the filing over there. We're going to have to watch closely to see where these trials go, especially now that he's no longer in the Prime Minister's office.
Iris Makler, it's never over with Netanyahu?
I guess you can say that, yes.
Iris Makler?
No, I was just thinking, well, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hello, hello? Have you lost me?
Not at all.
Oh, good. So I was just thinking that he has a strong base. I just want to take up that last point. He has a strong base and they do believe him. Many people do believe him when they say he's being persecuted. And they think that he has been targeted by the forces that want to bring him down. The story that he tells convinces many people who have voted for him. They also think he's been a great prime minister and it's all unfair. But there is definitely that victim thing that he projects. It's very interesting, both strong and a victim. And when he tells that victim story, people do believe him. So, that's why there's this split. And that's why even after 4 failed elections, there are enough people. I mean, he's still the head of the largest party. There are enough people who do believe him and who do give him credit. even in the midst of all that. And so to answer your question, yes, he doesn't think he's going anywhere. It's quite interesting. He held a meeting of all the opposition parties today. And it was very much, I'm your leader and don't you be going anywhere. We all have to be unified. I'm asking for iron discipline, he said. And the coded message is, I will be the leader, no challenges to me, thank you very much, and you all stay in the boat with me, and that's how we'll succeed. And that's been his message all along, but it didn't get him over this final hurdle now.
Iris, when you look at the Israeli press this Monday, many a political obituary has been penned, and you can run down the long list of people who used to be supporters of him, including obviously the new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, the new Finance Minister, Avigdor Lieberman. So with all of these former supporters, and again, it's been 12 years uninterrupted, how does he still have such a base?
It's quite interesting. I heard someone saying, who is responsible for this government? And they were looking down all the coalition leaders. And another Israeli analyst said, no, Netanyahu is responsible for this government because he has worked with all these people. And in the end, he treats them so badly that they leave and they form a new party. And these are the heads of the parties: Avigdor Lieberman, Gideon Sa'ar, Naftali Bennett. Before that, there were others as well who just haven't stayed this length. So it's him. His nature, his personality is both what attracts people to him. Amazingly charismatic speaker. I thought that speech in the parliament yesterday was sour and angry and aggressive. But, gee, he's a good speaker, even with all of that going on. So, yes, it's the strength of him and the weakness of him and the 12 years of him also. 12 years in a row this time, longer than that, of course, a long time on the Israeli public stage. So, yes, it is surprising how strong he is in with his base, given all that I've just described, but it's definitely there.
Just one final question on this, Iris. A lot of these political obituaries that I've been reading in the Israeli press, they point the finger at his wife, Sarah. Is that being overblown, you think?
It's interesting. You could write a book on the relationship, the Israeli public's relationship with her and the Israeli media's relationship with her. Every time I have a discussion just with ordinary people, they all say it's her fault. Really, almost to a man and woman.
It's always the wife's fault.
She's not a very liked figure. He'd be a great prime minister if it wasn't her. It's always the wife's fault, and in this case, it's definitely this wife's fault. So there is something in the Israeli public. She rubs people up the wrong way. There are also many cases that have been reported where she doesn't treat people who work inside the Prime Minister's residence very well, and this comes out into the media, case after case, over and over again. And he, the Prime Minister, says, you're persecuting my wife. But there's definitely something in their relationship and in her relationship with the public, which is kind of negative, I think. Yes.
John Linden, the Alliance for Middle East Peace, you work with civic groups, NGOs that are striving for less vitriol, obviously.
Right.
On this Monday, do you think, wow, it's great that Benjamin Netanyahu is gone? Or do you think, well, he's being replaced by a man whose political ideas are perhaps even more hardline?
Yeah, I mean, the identity of the Prime Minister is a very important variable, but it's not the only one within a coalition government. I think, part of the genius, in a way, of Benjamin Netanyahu, who's one of the most skilled political operators most of us have ever seen, has been to sort of freeze the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the last 12 years anyway. And, you've got to remember, this was a very dynamic, changing diplomatic environment for most of the last 20, 30 years. And many Israelis actually appreciate the fact that Netanyahu deprioritized it, kind of convinced many in the Israeli electorate and around the world that the conflict with the Palestinians wasn't the most important issue to view Israel through. And I think those of us who are working for peace, and we have over 150 members who are singularly focused on that, we see the opportunity in that may be ending. And that suddenly ideas around disrupting and changing the current environment can be back on the agenda again. And again, beyond the identity of the Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett is ideologically opposed to a two-state solution, very strong supporter of the settlements, obviously. There are other people within the cabinet who will be more receptive to that sort of messaging than we've had before. And then it's also worthwhile remembering that, you know, beyond a diplomatic agreement, which is very hard to achieve now, no matter who the Prime Minister is, there are suddenly lots of other things that could be done one level lower. And I think that's what's motivating many of our members right now.
All right, but sorry to pour cold water on your hopes here. Centrist Yair Lapid, he blasted Bibi in his first. He's going to be the prime minister, but only after 2 years under this deal. We'll see if we get that far. He blasted Bibi in his first remarks as foreign minister over Israel sometimes antagonizing the EU, over Netanyahu's partisan embrace of U.S. Republicans and Donald Trump. But the man who made this coalition possible, acting very much as the guardian of Netanyahu's legacy in one key aspect.
Part of our work will be, of course, to strengthen our presence in the region. Great things happened this past year. We need to continue the development that started with the Abraham Accords to work to strengthen peace with the Gulf states, with Egypt and with Jordan. We will work to sign agreements with more countries in the region and beyond. It's a process. It won't happen in a day, but the Foreign Ministry will coordinate those efforts.
There he is saying great things happen. Now, this normalization of ties with several important Arab states, it was harshly criticized by Palestinians as them being thrown under the bus. This outside-in approach. We're going to normalize relations, and that will improve a lot of the Palestinians. They said, look what happened with that recent flare-up of fighting between Israel and Gaza. When you hear Yair Lapid, are you disheartened? Are you down?
Not at all. No, I mean, so the idea of regional normalization really depends upon who's in charge and who's implementing it. When Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are implementing it, I understand the perspective of Palestinians when they see it as being conspiratorial. Suddenly, when you have Yair Lapid as foreign minister, who's one of the most consistent voices for a two-state solution in the Israeli Knesset, Isawi Frege, who's Emirates minister, an Arab minister for regional cooperation, first time ever, and his portfolio will be on this regional dynamic. And of course, Joe Biden in the White House, that reshuffles the cards and makes something that maybe a lot of people saw as being a trap, suddenly potentially being a tool. And you can imagine Lapid turning to his colleagues in Washington and working via some of the relationships developing in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and saying, how do we actually harness this towards resolving the conflict or certainly improving the material condition for people in the West Bank and Gaza in the short term? And I think to have an Israeli, and I want to emphasize this, Yair Lapid gave a speech to partners of ours called the Mitvim Institute recently, who said that the regional dynamic can never be fully resolved without ending the conflict, without a two-state solution. He was very clear about this. That is diametrically in opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu's analysis. So Lapid, reinvesting in the foreign ministry, which has been really gutted in the last 10 years, and taking this sort of diplomatic approach to the region and saying to quite receptive Arab partners, what can we do together with the United States to improve the reality, to narrow the gaps? There's a phrase that's being used a lot, shrink the conflict or shrink the occupation. Now, that doesn't end the conflict tomorrow morning, but after 12 years of frozen status quo, it could mean a material change. And I think it would be difficult for Naftali Bennett to oppose a foreign minister entrepreneurially taking that approach when these normalization deals are so popular inside Israel. And so that could be potentially a way that Lapid could leverage them towards genuine conflict.
I want to put it to the rest of the panel. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. First full day where you have a new prime minister in Israel for the first time in 12 years. We're talking about Naftali Bennett replacing Benjamin Netanyahu with correspondent Iris Makler in Jerusalem. Also in Jerusalem, Daniel Sturman, Israeli politics blogger for the Times of Israel. from Beit Shemesh, west of Jerusalem, media consultant Akiva Spiegelman. And here we're joined by John Linden, Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, who just before the break was telling us how there is an opportunity with this change of leadership. Do you agree with that, Akiva Spiegelman?
Yair Lapid has been working for years on end, almost since he entered politics, as sort of a backup minister, always addressing the Iran deal and foreign affairs. I don't know if they're going to be able to do big changes in what's already been put down.
But do you agree that there was this feeling when we had those 11 days of fighting recently between Israel and Gaza, that this idea that, well, you could just kind of ignore it and it'll kind of go away thanks to the Abraham Accords, that's not possible, that there has to, that the issue has to be addressed?
It does need to be addressed. There hasn't been a good way to come to the table in a very long time. Maybe now things will change a little bit. I doubt it. We still have the same issues. There's still a reluctance to have a real conversation about what can be done, and each side doesn't really want to give in on their principles, which obviously makes sense. We have to see now with the new players there, with the new government, if they can move anything. It's still, again, the same cards are on the table, and things aren't going to move very fast, if at all.
They're not going to move fast, if at all. Daniel Sturman, you agree?
Like I said before, the coalition is very frozen in place. It's expected to be frozen in place for a very long time because there's just way too many differences of opinion between the various sides. We can't. They have coalition agreements that they've come to, painstakingly long negotiating process, where they touch on every single subject you can possibly imagine. But every analyst will tell you this is basically a wish list, and just like any other wish list, any other party platform, it's going to take a lot of effort just to accomplish anything at all on any subject. All
right, a wish list, you say, and they're going to have to, nonetheless, address some of them head on. There are imperatives, as Andrew Hillier reports.
Getting rid of Netanyahu brought them together. Now, with him gone, the real work of finding common ground begins. But it'll be an uphill task. The first challenge facing the new coalition will be signing off a new budget in the first 100 days. If there's no agreement by then, the Knesset will dissolve and the country will have to hold elections once again. The man at the helm of the Ministry of Finance is Avigdor Lieberman, and he's not known for easily appeasing his partners. The coalition is expected to focus most of its energy on the economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. That's mainly because it's one of the only issues all the parties might be able to agree on. Israel has one of the world's leading vaccine rollouts. Now, lawmakers hope to translate that success into economic growth. The new coalition is the most diverse Israel has ever seen, with right-wing, left-wing and Arab parties all serving. That makes negotiating with a single voice on Palestinian statehood all but impossible. Bennett himself is openly against a two-state solution to the conflict. His party, Yamina, supports building Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. It means that for now, Israeli policy regarding the Palestinian conflict is unlikely to change.
So, Iris Makler, if I understand correctly, there's a freeze on doing anything inflammatory when it comes to settlement building and the such.
It's hard to know what the impact of the new team in Washington will have on all of these things. It's part of the kaleidoscope. There's a freeze, and they have specifically said, the members of the Coalition for Change, that their views are so divergent that they're not going to tackle this issue. There's also the fact that there's still the Fatah-Hamas split, that there hasn't been an election in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank for 15 years. So all of those things play into how difficult it is to do anything political here. But there is this new broom in Washington, a new spirit in the Democratic Party in the United States. I think all of those things will play in a way that we can't predict now. That if we all meet again in 12 months' time, we'll see different things than we thought. That I think that the kaleidoscope will shift in a way we can't tell at the moment.
So maybe to get a sense of whether or not this coalition lasts 48 hours or 4 years, Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, are they ideologues or are they pragmatic?
Was that for me?
Yes, it was, Iris Machler.
Oh, in that case, I'll answer. I think they are a little bit of both. I think we have seen Yair Lapid does have a commitment to diplomacy and to international relations that is quite different to the outgoing Prime Minister, to Benjamin Netanyahu. We have seen a huge, the religious part of Naftali Bennett's life is immense. He gave 2 prayers yesterday in the time that he was standing in the Parliament making his first speech. That is definitely part of him. But they are pragmatic enough to have come together from their different points of view. And I think it's that pragmatism, and I don't want to be overly idealistic, but also that goodwill that will stand them in good stead. Because the thing about Netanyahu's government, as with any government that goes on for so long, is it had become sclerotic. You can't attack this person. You can't have an inquiry into a stampede because people in the government are implicated. That all changes. And the sclerotic government is gone. The ill will all those people felt for each other is gone, and you have a new broom, and it's just, it's the pleasure of the new broom sweeping clean, which interestingly a lot of right-wing people have said to me when I discuss this with them. It's just time for a change, and I think that will work to the benefit of both these men in their idealism and their pragmatism.
Akiva Spiegelman, you agree?
Agree and disagree. I think this government is going to have to find a way to work things out because they have a lot on the line. Meaning, if they fall apart very fast, people are going to say, we saw that coming. On the other hand, if they manage to make it out until maybe the change of the heads, it's going to be interesting to see. The ideology changes and shifts within this coalition are so extreme that to put a needle between them is going to be very difficult, especially with a strong opposition. But with everything going on and with everything that they're going to be trying to do, it's going to be quite an interesting show to see what they could actually get done.
Daniel Sturman, in the U.S., people after the caustic rhetoric we heard for 4 years said they realized after Donald Trump had left how exhausting it was. Is there that feeling where you are?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. Bibi Netanyahu didn't have the same constant presence in people's lives that Donald Trump did on Twitter, where he would say a random thing on a random subject, and suddenly everybody had to talk about it and start fighting about it until the next random thing that he said on Twitter. Netanyahu wasn't like that. Netanyahu is fundamentally conservative in the literal sense of the word. He doesn't like to throw bombs, and the only reason that he started doing so in the last 2 years is because he saw that his grip on power was loosening, and he felt the need to go to further and further extremes in order to try to maintain it. But we can see that in pretty much every single one of his policy realms, he doesn't like to rock the boat. In fact, this entire electoral crisis started because a little over 2 years ago, a spy unit from the IDF was caught inside Gaza. There was a firefight as the spy unit had to escape the Hamas-owned territory, and Hamas, in response to the units killing several of the terrorists that tried to kill them, Hamas launched hundreds of missiles at Israel, and Netanyahu refused to respond. And he refused to respond because he didn't want an escalation. And that was the impetus for Avigdor Lieberman's leaving his coalition, which left him with a bare minimum 61 seats in the Knesset supporting the coalition. So he called a new election, hoping to increase his support. His support decreased, and we got stuck in this loop. So Netanyahu didn't like to rock the boat. So there wasn't really very much of, oh my God, Netanyahu is this oppressive presence in our life, and it's such a relief that he's gone. There is Netanyahu was a terrible prime minister, and there's such a relief that he's gone on the left. And there is Netanyahu was an amazing prime minister, and it's so horrible that he's gone on the right. But the oppressive presence that you're talking about, that the comparison to Donald Trump in that sense isn't very accurate.
Do you agree with that, John Linden?
No, not quite. I mean, I would trace the change much earlier than your previous guest. In 2015, Benjamin Netanyahu really started leaning into, when Donald Trump was still a TV host, right? Started leaning into very racist language against Palestinian citizens of Israel, saying they were voting in droves. It's when he first publicly recanted from his support for a two-state solution. And I think from that moment, including the very right-wing religious government that he built as a result of that election in 2015, we have seen a different Prime Minister Netanyahu. Then I think the analysis is correct before that. He was much more pragmatic and careful. I think he's been more populist in those last 6 years. And I think the other thing that he'll have a legacy now for is ushering in these Kahanists into the Knesset in the last election.
Yeah, explain to our viewers who they are.
Well, they are acolytes of a very, very far-right rabbi and the Kach movement, which has been designated a foreign terrorist organization in the United States, who, to varying degrees, have a public platform around the expulsion of Arab citizens from the country or loyalty tests in order for them to have citizenship. These are ideas and actors that were previously shunned by the right wing in Israel, that the entire Knesset left when Mayor Kahane got up and spoke. Netanyahu constructed a situation where their way was paved into the Knesset. And in a slightly kind of piece of poetic justice, perhaps, that is one of the reasons why he wasn't able to form a government in the end, because they are real racists and they refused to sit with the Arab parties, with Ram, the Islamic movement. And I think Netanyahu, confident in his own ability as a magician, assumed that he would be able to build a coalition with them and with Islamists together, but even that was too difficult even for him.
Yeah, just again, there is an eventual role of deputy prime minister that could go to an Islamist. Mansour Abbas has carved out for himself as well guarantees of increased spending for Arab-Israeli communities. He knows that this unprecedented leap into coalition politics for Arab Israelis makes it that he runs the risk of being branded a traitor by the Palestinians.
What we're doing is a big sacrifice for the sons of our nation, the sons and daughters of our society, for the sake of our present and our future. We're aware that this step contains a lot of risks and hardship. We can't deny this. But it's a big opportunity for us to change the equation and the balance of power in the Knesset and in the upcoming government.
Iris Makler, is it really, though, that big a risk?
Having Ram in the parliament, I would agree with John. I think it changes everything. And Netanyahu actually paved the way for Ram to join this coalition rather than his. He gave them the kosher stamp, someone here has said. And so now this is the revolution, I think. I don't know if Naftali Bennett's name will be remembered in 10 years, but this moment will be remembered. It's huge for many, many reasons, including the fact that Arab citizens of Israel are in the parliament, but they want to actually be part of the government. You can see that because his popularity has increased. So I think he's taking a huge risky step for him politically, but it could have very big implications for the communities that he represents and for the other Arab parties, because if they don't follow in his footsteps, perhaps if you're looking at the polling right now, perhaps they won't make it into the next parliament themselves.
Perhaps they won't make it into the next parliament themselves. So, Daniel Sturman, here's a question for you. It says that if you count all the seats in the Knesset, and if you counted all of those that are right-wing, you come up to 72 seats. It's not this 50-50 balance, but it's because of the personality of Netanyahu that it's different. My question is that correct? And I ask it because are the new fault lines in Israel no longer left versus right, but rather these questions of secular versus religious, the way John Linden was talking about it a moment ago?
I wouldn't say that secular versus religious is the fault line right now, partially because the new prime minister, Naftali Bennett, is the first religious prime minister in Israel's entire history. The fault lines are basically pro-Netanyahu versus anti-Netanyahu. And if and when he does leave the political scene, all the cards are shuffled. We could see the most random coalitions that are completely unimaginable right now. There's no way of knowing if the Haredi parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties, will suddenly join coalitions with left-wing parties that might convince them that they're not going to attack them as much as they've been attacking them under Netanyahu. You might have a realignment of the entire right and the religious right in the 72-seat majority that you described. There's really no way of telling.
John Linden?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, two things very quickly. One, this is an Islamist party in a governing coalition in the Jewish state of Israel. It's an extraordinary, I think it's the first country, non-Muslim majority country in the world that this has happened in. Nobody would have bet that Israel would be that country. And it's important to remember that many sort of anti-Islamist forces around the world had talked about Israel as this kind of bridgehead against political Islam. And now political Islam is ideologically inside a governing coalition. That's important because it shows you not to be fatalistic about what happens in Israeli politics. It's changed so much in the last 2 years. We've had electoral cycles speed up political evolution. And I think it leads to something very, very important in the medium term. For all of the history of the state, it's basically been taboo for Arabs to sit in government, to be making decisions with regards to security, for understandable reasons, for a country that's in conflict with its neighbours. That taboo now being broken changes everything on the electoral map, because 20% of Israelis are Palestinian or Arab citizens. To have 20% of society, of a minority group in particular, kind of disqualified from government for the entire government's history, that means that coalitions always tilt right. Now, suddenly to have that opened up again, and I think to watch Mansour Abbas, who's a very shrewd politician, I think he is going to do everything he can to keep this coalition going, to get goods for his community, to make sure that like development towns get recognised in the Negev, that budgets increase. And then what you may see, and I've got to be careful because you can't be too optimistic as well as being pessimistic about Israeli politics, is more participation by Arab citizens too. Now, why that's very important is in the war that we saw in May, one of the most dangerous dynamics that developed was this intercommunal violence. There's a lot of things going on there, but one of them is essentially
between Arab Israelis and Jews,
Jews,
which is something you hadn't seen in the previous.
I mean, we saw some of it maybe 21 years ago, but not in this kind of house-to-house kind of intercommunal way, which is very dangerous in a society that's already as divided as Israel is. The best way to fix that, whether you're left-wing or right-wing in Israel, is to really bind in together a sense of civic cohesion. Jews and Arabs together in joint political projects. I happen to think it's very, very good for Israeli democracy and politics over the long term. I'm not an Israeli voter, I don't get a choice, but it's also very, very good for cohesion. And that sense of civil unity and a shared citizenship. Many of our members at the Alliance for Middle East Peace, they work every day on this, creating coalitions between Arab and Jewish citizens. It's all there ready. And one of the things that's been really encouraging is the way that Naftali Bennett, on the right wing, a national religious figure, has talked about this Jewish-Arab cooperation, the way Yair Lapid has done so, and of course the way that Mansour Abbas has. That's something that we can be cautiously quite optimistic about, and it's brand new.
Do you share that cautious optimism, Akiva Spiegelman?
I do, but we need to be very clear about this. An Arab party in the coalition is a risk if we ever have tension with Gaza again. During the last 11 days of war, they didn't say a word. They kept very quiet, whether it was about the riots or the war itself. So we have to keep in mind on that. Also, this isn't a moderate Arab party. As you saw, Mansour Abbas spoke in Arabic, which is actually not allowed on the Knesset floor, but we'll let that slide. We need to see exactly what their ideals are, where they stand, and what exactly they're going to let and not let happen. I can see a lot of issues with building in the settlements, or if they want to make changes in the Negev, which is big right now, a big discussion about that. It almost threw the coalition under the bus before it even came to life. So we need to be very aware of what they want. They've understood the political map in a very good way, to their credit, and now we need to follow up and see what exactly they have in mind for the future.
What do they have in mind, John Linden?
I look at this pure political cynicism as part of it. They want to try and establish themselves as a political force, and I think they're entitled to do that as citizens of the state. Just to clarify, they did come out and very forcibly oppose the violence that we saw on the streets of mixed cities. Mansour Abbas, the only hit in the polls he's had recently was when he went to clean up a synagogue in Lod. And members of his own party were quite angry because he was there with a right-wing Likudnik mayor. So he has taken some steps that are quite brave for an Arab leader. I think he's also now opening up territory that hopefully other Arab politicians from the joint list may follow. And, you know, the thing to remember is Israel will only have peace internally and with its neighbours if it can reconcile the relationship between Jews and Arabs, Jews and Palestinians, both across the Green Line and within it. And I think Mansour Abbas and Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid should be applauded for the step that they've taken, and perhaps mostly Naftali Bennett. I don't often say this because he's not somebody ideologically I'm aligned with at all. But for both him and Mansour Abbas, they are out very far ahead of their communities. For somebody who's formerly the head of the settler movement, the Yesha Council, and somebody who's an Islamist political leader from an Arab community, to really stake out their political futures based upon Arab-Jewish cooperation working inside government, it's brave. I don't know what's going to happen, but they are now incentivized to make this work, because if it fails, and if it fails very quickly, I think both their political careers could well be over. So the stakes are very high, but it's good to see bold leadership. And I think, as Iris said earlier on, none of us know what's going to happen over the next 12 months.
And there's another first I want to talk about with you, Iris Makler, which is, for the first time ever, an Israeli Jew of Ethiopian birth who is in government.
She's an amazing woman. Actually, whenever I hear her speak, she's very impressive. She received a prize, which was a Menachem Begin prize, and somehow he was related to the Ethiopians arriving in Israel, so it was incredibly moving for her. And when she spoke about that, what it meant to leave Ethiopia as a child, how important their Judaism was to Ethiopian Jews. She's a very sophisticated woman. She's also extremely hardworking, and I've heard a number of people say that she was an excellent minister, and they're very pleased that she's continuing in that role in this government as well as she was in the last. So it's incredibly heartening. It's very heartening how many women there are in this parliament, in this particular government altogether. It's a coalition in which there are a lot of women. As you know, there's only one female head of a party in Israel at the moment, and Merav Michaeli of the Labour Party. But there are many women in this government. That's very heartening. And I do have to say one thing that this particular Ethiopian minister spoke about was that whenever there are photos of the cabinet in the ultra-Orthodox press, there are some newspapers that simply airbrush the women out because they can't have women in photographs. And she came out very strongly today against that and said, this isn't, we're here to do our jobs, and this is just benighted thinking. You have to recognise that we're here, and you can't airbrush us out of photographs and out of reality.
Tzmana Shata, the new immigration minister. Many thanks for that, Iris Makler. Just want to tell our viewers, we've been had a poll on the hashtag F24debate. How long will this government last? Some saying that...
What do they say?
Well, it was a mixed result, as you can see. 53% thinks it won't last until it'll be finished before the end of August 2023. The others say that it will last as only 8% say Yair Lapid will effectively become the next prime minister of Israel in 2023, in 2 years' time. We shall see, of course. The future is unwritten. I want to thank Iris Makler. I want to thank Daniel Sturman, Akiva Spiegelman, John Linden. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.